Hey everyone, this is your stimulus check update, second stimulus check update, and stimulus package update for Monday, September 21st. This update is for those of you on SSI, SSDI, Social Security, and VA benefits, and for anyone else that's wondering about the second stimulus check and the stimulus negotiations that are going on right now. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the following topics. First off, what's holding up the second stimulus check and what's keeping us from getting that second stimulus check? Secondly, how is replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court going to affect the stimulus check negotiations? And last of all, for those of you that still haven't received the first stimulus check, I'm going to be going over what you need to do so that you can get that first stimulus check. If this is your first time to my channel, my name is Justin and I give stimulus check updates and give financial advice. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you'll be notified each and every time I upload a new video. And if you find this content helpful, please hit the like button so that YouTube will share this video with others like you. Last week, I talked a lot about the Problem Solvers Caucus proposal. The proposal was a $1.5 trillion proposal that was a compromise between 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans that are members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and they are also members of the House of Representatives. This proposal, what I called a great compromise between the two sides and a good starting off point to finish the stimulus negotiations so that we can get another stimulus check. Unfortunately, that proposal has not been voted on and as such has not been passed yet either. I want to go over the things that are still keeping the stimulus check from being a reality and what's going on with these stimulus negotiations to keep the stimulus checks to be a reality and be sent out to everyone in America. So this proposal from the Problem Solvers Caucus included a lot of great things. It included 15% increases to SNAP and WIC benefits. It included rental assistance as well as an eviction moratorium. And of course, the thing that most people are interested in, the $1,200 stimulus checks for individuals. Those $1,200 stimulus checks would go out to those of you on SSI, SSDI, Social Security, and VA benefits, as well as basically anyone that received the first $1,200 stimulus check. In addition to this, it included $500 stimulus checks for child dependents and $1,000 for those of you that are adults but are also claimed as a dependent on someone else's taxes. So those are the kind of the popular things, especially the stimulus checks in this proposal, and those are things that both the Democrats and Republicans have agreed to at one point or another during these stimulus negotiations. So the things that are keeping this bill from happening and this proposal from happening are the following. First off, one of the biggest ones is funding for state and local governments. The HEROES Act that was passed by the House of Representatives back in May included $1 trillion for state and local governments to help them with shortfalls that they're experiencing because of the coronavirus pandemic. Republicans have countered and have argued that many of these state and local governments had financial problems long before the pandemic was even a thing. And they also said that there are some leftover funds from the CARES Act that still haven't been used that is meant to go to help state and local governments. So the Problem Solvers Caucus said, okay, well, Democrats, you want $1 trillion. Republicans, you don't want nearly that much. And some of the Republican proposals have basically called for none for state and local governments. Problem Solvers Caucus said, okay, let's just split the difference and say, okay, $500 billion for state and local governments. That was part of their proposal, and it seems like a great compromise so that the two sides can meet in the middle. In addition to this, unemployment benefits was one of the biggest sticking points previously in stimulus negotiations. The Democrats in the HEROES Act had called for a renewal of the $600 per week unemployment benefit extension of what expired at the end of July. That was the CARES Act, which had $600 per week unemployment benefits. The Republicans basically were countering, we don't want to pay people on unemployment more than they were making on their previous jobs because there actually were quite a few people that were receiving that $600 per week unemployment benefit that were making more on unemployment than they were at their previous jobs. So the Problem Solvers Caucus said, okay, Democrats, you want to renew this unemployment benefit. Republicans, you don't want to pay them more than they were making on their previous job. So the compromise was $450 per week for 8 weeks, and then after that, up to $600 per week unemployment benefits, but only up to what they were previously making before they lost their jobs. So I thought that was a pretty good compromise and that both sides should get what they were asking for. A renewal of the unemployment benefits, but also not paying people more to stay on unemployment than they were making at their jobs. One of the other biggest sticking points was liability protections for businesses, schools, and churches and other institutions. The Republicans had been asking for liability protections so that businesses and schools and churches could open back up without fear of frivolous lawsuits that were from people that were claiming that they had contracted coronavirus in their establishment but basically had no grounds to do so. So Republicans were trying to protect businesses, schools, and churches from those frivolous lawsuits. Well, Democrats were countering, because of these liability protections, businesses could basically do whatever they wanted and people couldn't sue them if they contracted coronavirus in their establishments. So the Problem Solvers Caucus said, okay, well, let's take the best of both worlds. We will protect businesses and churches and schools, however, only if they're following enhanced OSHA guidelines. If they follow those enhanced OSHA guidelines, then they will be protected. If they don't, then the workers and anyone else that comes into those establishments would have grounds to sue. So basically it was, okay, you're protected, but only if you follow the strict guidelines that are given. So the Problem Solvers Caucus came to a great compromise in that area as well. So I think that shouldn't be a point of contention anymore. The next thing, and I think this is the biggest one that's keeping these stimulus negotiations from going on, and that is the total price tag of the next deal. The Republicans previously have said, we won't go any more than $1 trillion, but that was back in July. They have since lowered that number when they tried to pass the skinny bill in the Senate, and that was only $500 billion. The House on the other side, and Nancy Pelosi has said, we aren't doing a deal unless it's at least $2.2 trillion. So that gap between the $2.2 trillion and the $500 billion or $1 trillion that the Senate has called for, that's the biggest problem right now between the two sides. However, the Problem Solvers Caucus proposal said, okay, well, you want between $1 trillion and $500 billion, and on the other side you want $2.2 trillion. Okay, this proposal will be $1.5 trillion to start, but with boosters, this proposal could get up to almost $2 trillion. So that's basically right near the number that Nancy Pelosi has been calling for of $2.2 trillion. With the boosters that only kick in if the economy is still having problems, the Problem Solvers Caucus bill hits about $2 trillion. And it also would include a second stimulus check. Well, actually, it would be a third stimulus check as part of that proposal if there were still economic problems by the time March 2021 rolls around. That's been the biggest sticking point between the two sides, is that total dollar amount. But I even think the Problem Solvers Caucus got really close to hitting both sides, because if some of the money isn't used or is not needed, then it actually has reducers as well as those boosters. So it basically says, okay, well, if we don't actually need this money, then it doesn't have to be used. And if we need more money, then we can boost it and use some of the more funds that are needed so that we can get closer to that $2.2 trillion number. That's why I've been such a big fan of this Problem Solvers Caucus proposal, because it really does compromise in all of the areas that both sides have kind of had the biggest problem with, and when trying to move forward in these stimulus negotiations. Now there's a big argument between the Democrats and Republicans regarding filling the now vacated seat from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So the Republicans are saying, we need to fill this seat as soon as possible, and we need to fill this seat before the next election. Well, Democrats are basically saying, you stopped us when President Obama tried to fill the Supreme Court with somebody that had passed away, and Republicans, you blocked us from doing so before the next election. And now you're saying that we have to do this before the election? Well, the thing is, the Democrats are actually using the Republicans' own words against themselves, because they used some of these words back in 2016 when they blocked Obama from doing it. So the reason why this is critical to stimulus negotiations is the Republicans are going to be pushing this through and trying to push for a nomination and a vote on the next Supreme Court to fill that vacancy. And because of that, they're going to be less focused on stimulus negotiations. And the Democrats on the other side are pushing back and saying, you really shouldn't do this. We need to wait until after the election before we should fill the seat. So the problem is they're now going to be focusing a lot on filling that Supreme Court vacancy or on stopping that Supreme Court vacancy from being filled. So anyway, that's going to be something that we need to watch this week and see if that does anything to derail the stimulus negotiations. For those of you that still haven't received your first stimulus check, I continue to get comments from people saying that they still haven't received their first stimulus check, and many of those people are on SSI, SSDI, Social Security, or receive VA benefits. So if you have not received your first stimulus check, this is what you need to do. First off, if you do not file taxes, you must fill out the non-filers tool if you haven't already. The IRS originally said that those on SSI, SSDI, Social Security, and VA benefits did not need to do anything to receive their first stimulus check. Well, they have changed their tune and have said you need to now fill out the non-filers tool if you do not file taxes so that we know where to send your first stimulus check. In addition to this, the IRS said last week that they're going to be mailing out 9,000 letters to individuals that do not file taxes and have not received their first stimulus check and may be eligible for the first stimulus check. Remember, as long as you're not claimed as a dependent, you should be eligible for the first stimulus check as long as you're below the income threshold. If you get one of these letters in the mail from the IRS, it should give you instructions on what you need to do to get your first stimulus check, but most of those instructions are probably just going to be fill out the non-filers tool. So if you haven't already and you have not received your first stimulus check, fill out the non-filers tool. In addition to this, if you have filled out the non-filers tool and you still don't have your first stimulus check and don't have a date for your first stimulus check on the Get My Payment portal, you need to call the IRS at 1-800-919-9835. If you get a representative that does not take your information and just gives you a general thing like, oh, you should get it before the end of the year, and they don't take your information, you need to say, can you please transfer me to someone that can get me an answer to my specific question about my stimulus check? If they can't transfer you, then you need to call back and keep calling back until you get a representative that can take your information and find out exactly what you need to do to get your first stimulus check. I've had quite a few people recently in my comments that have said, thank you so much for asking me to call the IRS again and for asking me to fill out the non-filers tool, because I did that and I finally have a date or I finally have my check. So be sure, those are the two things really you can do right now. Call the IRS if you've already filled out the non-filers tool, and if you haven't filled out the non-filers tool, fill it out if you do not file taxes. I do hope you have a wonderful day today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon.